On the evening of May 7th, 1840, the Mississippi River was calm. Steamboats were docked. Passengers laughed. Workers finished their day along the riverfront of Natchez, Mississippi. Then the wind stopped. Not slowly. Suddenly. Witnesses later said the air felt heavy, as if the river itself was holding its breath. Seconds later, people standing on the docks were lifted off the ground. Not pushed, not dragged. Lifted and thrown into the river like debris. Boats snapped from their moorings. Entire structures vanished. Screams were swallowed by the sound of tearing wood and collapsing stone. By morning, hundreds were dead. Many were never counted, and some, by design, were erased from history. This is the story of the Great Natchez Tornado, the deadliest single tornado in U.S. history, and one of the most silent disasters America has ever seen. In 1840, Natchez was one of the wealthiest cities in the United States. Built high on bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, it was a center of cotton trade, steamboat traffic, plantation wealth. Money flowed through Natchez like the river below it. But that wealth rested on a brutal foundation. Thousands of enslaved people labored on surrounding plantations, loading cotton, building levees, maintaining docks, and serving households. Their names rarely appeared in official records, alive or dead. On May 7th, the city prepared for another normal spring evening. Steamboats crowded the riverfront. Hotels and warehouses were full. Enslaved workers were still on the docks, unloading cargo late into the night. No warnings existed. No weather forecasts. No sirens. Only the sky. Around 5 p.m., people noticed something strange. The clouds were not dark. They were greenish-gray. The air grew unnaturally warm. Birds disappeared. The river surface went eerily smooth. Veteran rivermen, people who had survived storms their entire lives, later said they felt something they couldn't explain. A pressure. A wrongness. By 6 p.m., the wind arrived. Not gradually. Violently. The tornado struck directly along the Mississippi River, not inland like most tornadoes. This alone made it unprecedented. Witnesses described a roaring sound, louder than cannon fire. Buildings on the riverfront were ripped apart in seconds. Warehouses collapsed. Entire docks vanished into the water. But the most horrifying detail came from the river itself. People standing on boats and docks were lifted into the air and hurled into the Mississippi River. Steamboats, some weighing hundreds of tons, were sunk, smashed together. Passengers were trapped below decks as vessels capsized. Many drowned without ever seeing what hit them. Bodies were later found miles downstream, tangled in trees, lodged in mudbanks, or never recovered at all. These deaths, on the water, were never officially counted. The tornado cut a path through Natchez in minutes, but the destruction was total. Brick buildings collapsed like sand. Roofs became weapons. Entire families were buried under rubble. Eyewitnesses described people impaled by flying timbers, children ripped from their parents' arms, bodies stripped of clothing by the wind. One account describes a man found alive, pinned beneath debris, begging rescuers to first help a woman nearby, only for them to discover she had no head. Another described bodies stacked together, as if the storm had sorted them. By nightfall, fires burned across the city. Rain poured onto ruins. The injured screamed for help in darkness. And beneath all of it lay a truth that would never be written down. The official death toll of the Great Natchez Tornado is 317 people. That number appears in history books. It is also almost certainly false. Here's why. In 1840, enslaved people were legally considered property, not citizens. Their deaths were often recorded, if at all, only as lost assets, not human lives. Plantation owners reported damage to buildings and crops. They rarely reported the deaths of enslaved workers. Many enslaved people were working on docks, living in riverfront quarters, housed in fragile wooden structures. These areas were obliterated by the tornado. Bodies of enslaved victims were buried quickly, buried anonymously, buried without names or markers. Some were not buried at all. Historians estimate the real death toll may have been 500, 600 or more. but no official effort was ever made to count them. Most deadly tornadoes strike inland communities. This one struck a crowded riverfront at peak activity. 3 unique factors made it catastrophic. First, the tornado tracked along the Mississippi River, maximizing contact with boats, docks, and workers. Second, heavy river traffic meant hundreds of people were exposed on open decks with no shelter. Third, the buildings along the river were dense, packed closely together, increasing flying debris. It was the perfect storm. Without rain, without warning, without mercy. To this day, it remains the only tornado in U.S. history known to have killed hundreds in a single strike. In the days following the disaster, Natchez struggled to function. The wealthy rebuilt quickly. The poor did not. Newspapers reported damage to commerce, shipping losses, and property destruction. They did not investigate missing enslaved people. There were no memorials for them, no lists of names, no graves with markers. Their deaths vanished into silence. Even the tornado itself faded from national memory. Why? Because acknowledging the full scale of the disaster would require acknowledging whose lives were lost and whose lives were considered expendable. For weeks after the tornado, bodies continued to surface downstream. Some were recognized. Most were not. River towns hundreds of miles away reported finding corpses tangled in driftwood. Many were buried where they were found, unnamed. No effort was made to trace them back to Natchez. The Mississippi River became a moving cemetery. Despite its scale, the Great Natchez Tornado is rarely taught. It does not appear prominently in school textbooks. It is overshadowed by later disasters with better records. But this was not just a natural disaster. It was a human one, a disaster shaped by inequality, slavery, whose lives were counted, and whose were erased. The storm did not discriminate. The records did. Today, Natchez is quiet. Tourists walk along restored riverfronts. Historic homes stand proudly above the river. Plaques mention the tornado, briefly. They rarely mention bodies thrown into the river. Enslaved victims excluded from counts. The likely true death toll. There is no national memorial, no day of remembrance, only fragments of eyewitness accounts buried in archives. The Great Natchez Tornado was not just the deadliest tornado in American history. It was the deadliest that America chose not to remember fully. Hundreds died in minutes. Many more were erased afterward. And the silence that followed lasted longer than the storm itself. Natural disasters end when the wind stops. But some disasters continue, in what we choose not to count, not to name, and not to remember. The Great Natchez Tornado ended on May 7th, 1840. Its silence did not.